Use these secrets to work your league mates over, because week 1 is where you take advantage of every single person that sucks at fantasy football. Because last year in week 1, Mac Jones was the quarterback 2. Tyler Algier was the running back 4. Kendrick Bourne was the wide receiver 5. Calvin Ridley was the wide receiver 6. Tutu Atwell was the wide receiver 15. And CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 32. And what you should take away from that, week 1 means absolutely nothing. In fact, when you're talking about fantasy analysis, week 1, you really can't take away actual fantasy conclusions until like week 3 or 4. Most NFL coaches would tell you the first couple weeks are all complete parity. Yep. That's typically how it is when you start a new season. But in terms of fantasy football, week 1 is absolute panic central. People will panic huge if their star players do not do squat, and they will super overreact if players they have down on their bench or in their flex spots do amazingly well. And so we say this in Dynasty, but it absolutely applies to fantasy football as well. Keep your head above the waves. The waves are going to come crashing during week 1. They will. Everything is going to get completely thrown out of sorts. Week 1 is never boring. Week 1 is always super chaotic. That is the best word for it. It's always chaotic. And so with week 1, you also need to be on top of your waivers in this week, especially because we saw last year guys like Puka Nacua, guys like Kyron Williams, guys like Brock Purdy,
Jacoby Myers.
All of these guys, some of those guys ended up being league-winning waiver pickups. Sam Laporta, big one.
Huge.
Week 1's going to be important. So it's going to be keep your head above the waves and work your waivers. Because when you're talking about breakouts in fantasy football, it really is tough to overspend on those guys. I'd rather dump my entire freaking free agent bidding money
in the first couple weeks of the season,
because that's where your guys are going to be found, right?
Yes.
Your league winning waiver guys are not going to come in weeks 3 through 8. And so waivers is going to be really important in weeks 1 and 2, week 1 especially. So it's going to be strategic. Obviously, if you do rolling waivers and it's all just random waiver assignments, then you're basically just at the mercy of whatever your waiver position is that week. That's why we endorse free agent bidding for waivers, and we'll give you advice here on this channel on how much of your waiver budget you should spend. And if there's somebody that we think is a serious breakout, we're going to tell you to dump your waiver budget on them. We won't be holding back this year. And again, make sure you subscribe to get our waivers video as soon as it comes out after week 1, because it's going to be really important that you turn notifications on. Like as soon as it comes out, boom, drop your free agent money and go get those breakouts. But you do have some trade leverage as well when you get those hot names. And so from a strategic standpoint, it's not only good because it could win you the league, but because if it doesn't, and if you think, I don't think this guy actually is a league winner, and if we're saying, I don't think this guy actually is a league winner,
it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, right? Because even though Kendrick Bourne ended up not winning you a league, even though Tutu Atwell didn't end up winning you a league, or Tyler Algier, those guys were big names to start the season, and you had league mates that were really, really high enough to overpay for them if you got your hands on them before they could, right? So I think regardless, right, a lot of people this year are looking for the next Puka.
Not happening.
You're not going to find the next Puka. And even if there is someone from a production standpoint that surprises as much as Puka Nacua did last year, the chances of you being correct on your selection in week 1 is very, very, very low. We're not telling you to find the next Puka. We're telling you to find the guys that are the hottest names and to use it as trade leverage. That's the biggest point.
And like we said, don't be afraid to spend your money. Don't spend it all, but don't be afraid to spend it.
Yeah.
Again, you're shooting for... Wow, that was fun.
Thanks.
We're shooting for upside in these fantasy football leagues, right? So when I'm approaching waivers, when I'm approaching my strategy, building my team in week 1, I'm going to be on top of waivers. I'm going to know exactly what the market is. I'm going to be watching Domain Fantasy Football to get my waiver advice, because we're going to be on freaking top of it. We have to be. And we're going to take advantage and pounce just so we can make sure we have the hottest names and we have the upside guys if they could potentially win our league this year.
Yep. So. Old crusty guys do still win you fantasy championships. And that means that generally, most, not all rookies, right? We're starting to see a trend upward for rookies producing right out the gate. But still, a majority of rookies heading into the start of the season just don't do anything production-wise for at least the first couple weeks of the season, right? They've got to be implemented into a new offense. They have to be implemented into the NFL, a professional league where they're going from college to playing in the big leagues where they're probably getting their butts kicked for most of the time. Like, I can't talk today. But look, a lot of them are going to plummet down rankings because of this, right? You have a lot of super high expectations for wide receivers. Wide receivers specifically. How many wide receivers that are rookies are going in the top 10 rounds of your fantasy drafts this year? Like 6? I think like 6 or 7, a lot of them, because a ton of them were drafted
7 or
last
8,
year.
actually.
Yeah, it's a lot. And look, chances are that at least half of those guys are not going to do anything the first week.
Correct.
At all. Anything at all. So they will, by default, inevitably fall down rankings. Make sure you monitor that while you're strategizing for the outlook of the rest of your season, because while they're going to be plummeting down in market value, price, and just overall opinion in the fantasy community, they really should be rising, because they're getting that more experience, right? They're getting more potential opportunity down the line. They were drafted where they were drafted for a reason. All these receivers that are going in the first 8 to 9 rounds of your fantasy drafts this year were drafted in the first or early second round.
Bingo.
They were drafted to be utilized pretty quickly. It's just going to take a little bit of time. So if you can get some of those rookie guys at a discount after week 1, when people are like, oh no, it's going to be DJ Moore and Keenan Allen all year, then go ahead and capitalize on that and go get a Rome Odunze, right? Oh no, it's going to be Josh Palmer all year. Please go capitalize on Lab McConkey at a discount. Oh no, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, Evan Ingram. What are we going to do? Go ahead and take a shot at Brian Thomas. It doesn't mean that every single one of those shots is going to work, but again, if these guys are plummeting down rankings, you're going to get them for cheap anyways.
Absolutely. All right. Next thing that we have to emphasize here is to know your league mates, know their rosters specifically, and know where the deficits are in their rosters. You're going to follow injuries really closely because of this. An example, last year, Jerome Ford's trade value went way up after Nick Chubb's knee exploded live on primetime football.
Blew up.
I mean, absolutely lost his knee. Although, thankfully, he's coming back. Really glad about that.
Yeah.
As somebody who also blew up my knee, I'm really happy. But with Jerome Ford, this was a guy last year that if you took advantage of this, you were able to send Jerome Ford off for an absolute freaking haul. And it wasn't all that unpredictable that Jerome Ford wouldn't necessarily be a guy that is going to win you a league last year. When you're looking at what he did, he was the running back 17 and a half PPR leagues. And a lot of times he's being treated as a running back 1. He really was. And so you can take advantage of that. And a lot of this is mental, guys. You really want to get a strategical leg up on your league mates. Play the mental game with them, right? Tell them your running backs suck. You need this guy. Here, I'll give you this guy. You give me this guy. It's a mutually beneficial trade. I'm probably losing this trade, which again, most people won't believe that. It depends on who you're playing with. Probably losing this trade. You just take this guy right here. You take your Jerome Ford and fill your running back slot with it, right?
And I'll take Michael Pittman.
Yeah, I mean, you're targeting.
That's what I did.
Inevitably, you're going to have somebody in your leagues this year that loses a star player week 1. And I'm looking at those guys and I'm licking my chops, because I'm like, I am going to take advantage of that guy if it kills me, because I know that he's freaking out that Brandon Ayuk got hurt in week 1. I know it. And so I'm going to trade him my nice little waiver wire Ricky Pearsall right now. I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to feel bad about either. Zach Moss is another good example of this. Zach
Great
Moss,
leverage example last year.
And last year, Zach Moss actually performed. However, you still had so much leverage because it was week after week after week of Zach Moss performing, knowing Jonathan Taylor was going to come back. And when JT did come back, he wasn't near as productive, right?
But he still did produce for the first couple of weeks.
For the first couple of weeks, you're kind of like, is this really happening? But then it didn't happen. But still, a great example of having leverage over your league mates, knowing their rosters, knowing... Again, every time I see, this player's injured, this player's injured, this player's injured, I'm like, who has them?
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna see if they're interested in maybe one of the guys I don't want or need, somebody that's cuttable, and maybe get some startable depth back. So again, track injuries, track your league mates, and play them like an absolute fiddle.
Mm-hmm. And make sure you're tracking those individual players too that lay goose eggs, guys that have high expectations heading into week 1, guys that you pretty much without a shadow of a doubt need to start week in and week out, and they put up 0 points.
Yep.
Right now, you just want to see what their value ends up being if the people that own those guys are freaking out. So if I'm just putting this out as an example, I'm not predicting it, even though we kind of did. If George Pickens puts up a goose egg, or he only puts up 5 points to start the season because it's not a super favorable matchup, look, every player in the fantasy market is totally for the taking in my book, even if I don't like them and their initial price at ADP before the season started. Because if George Pickens, value-wise, falls like a significant amount and he's going way cheaper than he was heading into the season, then I'm going to go take him at price if someone's super low on him when he puts up 0 points in the first week of the year. Right? Because again, like last year, you can talk about the best possible players at the quarterback position. Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts were quarterbacks 19 and 20. They put up 10 and 12 points respectively. It was disgusting. It was gross. Right now, everyone was smart enough to know that it's Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen. But again, you can apply that to other receivers. If Zay Flowers starts out slow because Mark Andrews comes out screaming and Derrick Henry loses his mind week 1 of the season, I'm probably going to go look and see what I can get for Zay Flowers because his situation didn't change. The fact that he's a wide receiver 1 in that situation didn't change. Right? So make sure you're monitoring those situations. You can generally see a lot of your league mates start freaking out when one of the guys they invested in the top 6 rounds of their fantasy draft lays a goose egg. It's just going to happen in week 1.
With all the volatility in fantasy football, and when you're keeping an eye on certain situations, both in your league and in the NFL, you have to keep an eye on running back. And so week 1, keep an eye on those running back snap shares. We'll bring it all to you in our playbook video, which will be live Sunday night after all the games are done. We'll get it out to you, and we're going to tell you, hey, this is a running back 2 that we did not expect. Go get him off of waivers, right? This is a running back 2 that you may have somebody in your league that got less carries, but we think they're going to project well. Go trade for them right now. Keep an eye on the running back position. It's easily the most volatile position in all of fantasy football. And the rotations, easily the most volatile in football, right? The committees, easily the most volatile in football. And so in terms of who the number 2 is, keep track of who that is in every single offense. Not every single second option is going to be a big waiver pickup. We have second options right now we're not super high on. Bucky Irving's a good example of that. I mean, even if Bucky Irving, somebody who scores 10 points in week 1, we might be like, maybe.
But hey, if his rostership goes down and down and down and down and people start just dropping him consistently, you may as well just zig when everyone else is zagging.
Exactly.
And just go and grab him for a week or 2 and see if you get lucky because it's free insurance leverage.
Exactly.
You know?
And so with running back especially, most of the time, because wide receiver, I mean, we're a little bit more used to this because it happened with Puka last year. Most of the time, and honestly Tank Dell and Rashee Rice, there were a lot of them last year.
Josh Downs.
Yeah, I guess it is happening more. Okay. My point was going to be actually it's happening. It typically happens more with running backs, but in fact, you have seen it happen more with receivers as you've had more productive receivers in the NFL. It's still less volatile than running back. And so keep an eye specifically on the running back position. Make sure you're keeping an eye on the snap counts. Make sure you're keeping an eye on opportunity share, who's getting the red zone touches, who's getting the third down touches as well. Those are going to be very indicative of who's going to be fantasy productive in certain offenses. And so I would definitely keep a close eye on that and make sure you're monitoring where those running backs are on which rosters in your fantasy football leagues.
Bad offenses always look best in the first month of the season, specifically in week 1. And there can be some big surprises in bad offenses as a result, and position groups, just bad position groups as a whole, right? Make sure you're monitoring those second and third receiving options in rooms with no alpha. That can be at the running back position, the wide receiver position, the tight end position, whatever. Any of those rooms that have major questions, make sure you're monitoring those situations. Make sure if you didn't get any guy that you want on waivers and you can just pick someone else up for free, look at some of those poor offenses that had no standout or haven't had a standout all offseason and just see if you can't be right about one of those guys. Adam Thielen is a great example of this last year. He was being drafted in some of the later rounds, but you were able to get him at a really, really cheap, affordable price, and you knew it was going to be a bad situation, a bad offense, and he ended up showing out and was a wide receiver 1 through the first 2/3 of the season. Jacoby Myers, another great example, right? He was the second option in a bad offense behind Devontae Adams. No one expected anything. He way outproduced expectation. Jonnu Smith, like the second option at the tight end position in a bad offense, but also honestly like the real tight end there because Kyle Pitts is basically a wide receiver. And no one saw that coming. He ended up being a hot waiver pickup for multiple weeks there. Kendrick Bourne, you seeing a trend here, right? Bad offense. Jaden Reed. We didn't know what Jordan Love in Green Bay was going to do in 2023. Josh Downs. So those are some of the examples from last year, right? Where you just looked at some of those situations, you're like, that's disgusting. But everything's disgusting there. There's got to be someone that shows out at some point, and you ended up hitting on some of those guys. So look at those situations this year. That's why we like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson so much as kind of like early season dart throw waiver shots that you can get for free. If you have the waiver spot, if you drafted TJ Hawkinson and he's on your IR and you have an open spot, go get one of those guys. And if they don't do anything after week 1, you make a different waiver claim for someone who actually showed out. But those are kind of the types of situations that we like to look at.
And so with strategy especially, we're strategy guys. We also play Dynasty, so we're really big into the strategy part of fantasy football. It's important to try to take advantage of your league mates where you can. Yeah. We can help you do that. We give you Team reviews in the form of team blueprints, which you can get at flockfantasy.com/domain. Use code domain, choose the Motherflocker tier, choose the annual Motherflocker tier with code domain, and you will get a team blueprint, which is a detailed breakdown of your entire fantasy team and what moves you need to make to win your fantasy leagues this year. Like I said, you get a free one with the annual Motherflocker membership with code domain. So like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. You can find that link in the comments. But we appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.